Hello everyone. This is Professor Soy Kripa, Department of English, Vistas, Chennai. Today, the title of that session is Poetry During the Romantic Age and Kinds of Poetry. It belongs to Unit 2 in Block 1. Here, I am going to start with a small bit of revision of the characteristics of romantic age. Then we will see, so what about the poetry in romantic age and what about the kinds of poetry? That we will see later. The main characteristics of romantic age. Characteristics of romanticism. Romantic literature is marked by 6 primary characteristics. They are celebration of nature, focus on the individual and spirituality, celebration of isolation and melancholy, interest in the common man, idealization of woman, and personification of pathetic fallacy. These categories, which it has become customary to use distinguishing and classifying and movements in literature or philosophy and in describing the nature of the significant transitions which have taken place in taste and an opinion of far too rough, crude, undiscriminating, and none of them so hopelessly as the category of romantic. So all these words taken from Arthur O. Lovejoy on the description of romanticism. So through these quotations, Arthur O. Lovejoy given a nice description about that romantic age. Here, that is, many scholarly says that in the romantic period began with the publication of lyrical ballads by William Wordsworth and Samuel Coleridge in 1798. The volume contained some of the best known works from these two poets, including Coleridge, The Rime of Ancient Mariner, and Wordsworth, a lines written a few miles from Clinton Abbey. Of course, other literary scholars place the Romantic period much earlier, around 1785. Since Robert Burns' poem 1786, William Blake's Songs of Innocence 1789, Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women and other works already demonstrate that the change has taken place in political thought and literary expressions. Other first generation romantic writers include Charles Lamb, Jane Austen, and Sir Walter Scott. The second generation, here, there was a second generation of romantic writers made up of poets and Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, though geniuses died young. Yes, as died young and were outlawed by the first generation of romantics. Of course, Mary Shelley, still famous for Frankenstein, was though geniuses died young. While there is some disagreement about when the period began, the general consensus is romantic period ended with the coronation of Queen Victoria, heels of the new classical era. Here we saw amazing wit and satire with the Pope and Swift as a part of the last age, but the romantic period dawned with the different poetics in the air. In the backdrop of those new romantic writers penning their way into literary history, we are on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution and writers were affected by the French Revolution. William Hafid, who published a book called The Spirit of the Age, says that Wordsworth's school of poetry had its origin in the French Revolution. It was a time of promise, a renewal of the world and of letters. Instead of embarrassing politics as writers of some others eras might have, indeed, some writers of the Romantic era did, the Romantic turned to nature for self fulfillment. They were turning away from the values and ideas of the previous era, embracing new ways of expressing their imagination and feeling. Instead of concentration on head, the intellectual focus of reason, they preferred to rely on the self in the radical idea of individual freedom. Instead of striving for perfection, the Romantics preferred the glory of the imperfect. Today, the word romantic evokes image of love and sentimentality, but the term romanticism has a much wider meaning. It covers a range of developments in art, literature, music, and philosophy spanning the late 18th and early 19th century. The Romantics would not have used the term themselves. The label was applied retrospectively from around the middle of the 19th century. In 1762, Jean-Jacques Rousseau declared in The Social Contract, man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. During the Romantic period, a major transitions book place in society as dissatisfied intellectuals and artists challenged the establishment. In England, the Romantic periods, especially their Romantic poets, were at the very heart of this movement. They were inspired by a desire for liberty and they denounced the exploitation of the poor. There was an emphasis on the importance of individual, a conviction that people should follow ideals rather than imposed conventions and rules. The Romantics denounced the rationalism and other associated with the preceding Enlightenment era, stressing the importance of expressing authentic personal feelings. They had a real sense of responsibility to their fellow men. They felt it was their duty to use their poetry to inform and inspire others and to change society. Revolutions happened during Romantic period. It just made to Romantic worse. The poets who generally spring to mind are William Blake, 1757 to 1827, William Wordsworth, 1770 to 1850, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, 1772 1834, George Jordan, that is 6th Lord Byron, 1788 to 1824, P.B. Shelley, 1792 to 1822, and John Keats, 1795 to 1821. These writers had an intuitive feeling that they were chosen to guide others to the tempestuous period of change. This was a time of physical confrontation, of violent rebellion in parts of Europe and the New World. Conscious of anarchy across the English Channel, the British government feared similar outbreaks. The early Romantic poets tend to be supporters of the French Revolution, hoping that it would bring about political change. However, the bloody reign of terror shocked them profoundly and affected their views. In his youth, William Wordsworth was drawn to the Republican cause in France until he gradually became disenchanted with the revolution. That is the imagination part. In Romantic period, the Romantics were not in agreement about everything they said and did, far from it. Nevertheless, certain key ideas dominated their writings. They genuinely thought that they were prophetic figures who could interpret reality. The Romantics highlighted the healing power of the imagination because they truly believed that it could enable people to transcend their troubles and their circumstances. Their creative talents could illuminate and transform the world into a coherent vision to regenerate mankind's spirituality. In A Defense of Poetry 1821, Shelley elevated the status of poets, a comprehensive and all-penetrating spirit. What that is, the status of the poets, they measure the circumstances and sound the depths of the human nature with a comprehensive and all-penetrating spirit. He declared that poets are the acknowledged legislators of the world. This might sound somewhat pretentious, but it served to convey the faith the Romantics had in their poet. The marginalized and oppressed in the Romantic period, Wordsworth was concerned about the elitism of earlier poets whose eyebrow language and subject matter were neither readily accessible nor particularly relevant to ordinary people. He maintained that poetry should be democratic, that it should be composed in the language really spoken by men. The language really spoken by men. So this phrase is taken from Preface to Lyrical Ballads 1802. So for this reason, he tried to give a voice to those who tended to be marginalized and oppressed by society. The rural poor, discharged soldiers, fallen, women, the insane, and the children. Blake, that is William Blake, was radical in his political views, frequently addressing social issues in his poems and expressing his concerns about the monarchy and the church. His poem, London, draws attention to the suffering of chimney sweeps, soldiers, and prostitutes. Next phase, children, nature, and the serpent. For the world to be regenerated, the Romantics said that it was necessary to start all over again with a childlike perspective. They believed that children were special because they were innocent and uncorrupted, enjoying a precious affinity with nature. Romantic verse was suffused with reference for the natural world in Coleridge's Frost at Midnight, 1798. The poet hailed nature as the great universal teacher. Recalling his unhappy times at Christ Hospital School in London, he explained his aspirations for his son, Hartley, who would have the freedom to enjoy his childhood and appreciate his surroundings. The Romantics were inspired by the environment and encouraged people to venture into new territories, both literally and metaphorically. In their writings, they made the world seem a place with infinite, unlimited potential. These all the things that happened one by one in the Romantic period. The second generation Romantics, Blake, Wordsworth, and Coleridge were first generation Romantics, writing against a backdrop of war. Wordsworth, however, became increasingly conservative in his outlook. Indeed, second generation Romantics such as Byron, Shelley, and Keats felt that he had sold out to the establishment. In the suppressed dedication to Don John, 1819 to 1824, Byron criticized the poet laureate Robert Southey and other Lakers, Wordsworth and Coleridge. All three lived in the Lake District. Byron also vented his spleen on the English Foreign Secretary, Viscount Castlereagh, denouncing him as an intellectual enigma, a bungler, and a tinkering slave maker. So all these things, all these phrases are taken from stanza 11 and 4 in Byron's poem. Although the Romantics stressed the importance of the individual, they also advocated a commitment to mankind. Byron became actively involved in the struggles for Italian nationalism and the liberation of Greece from Ottoman rule. Notorious for his sexual exploits and dogged by debt and scandal, Byron quitted Britain in 1816. Lady Caroline Lamb famously declared that he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Similar accusations were pointed at Shelley, nicknamed Mad Shelley at Eton. He was sent down from Oxford for advocating atheism. He antagonized the establishment further by his criticism of the monarchy and his immoral lifestyle. Female poets. Female poets also contributed to the Romantic movement, but their strategies tended to be more subtle and less controversial, although Dorothy Wordsworth, 1771 to 1855, was modest about her writing abilities. She produced poems of her own, and her journals and travel narratives certainly provided inspirations for her brother. Women were generally limited in their prospects, and many found themselves confined to the domestic sphere. Nevertheless, they did manage to express or intimate their concerns. For example, Mary Alcock, 1740 to 1788, penned The Chimney Sweeper's Complaint. In The Birthday, Mary Robinson, 1758 to 1800, highlighted the enormous discrepancy between life for the rich and the poor. Gender issues were foregrounded in Indian Woman's Death Song by Felicia Hemans, 1793 to 1835. Then the Gothic. Reaction against the Enlightenment was reflected in the rise of Gothic novel. The most popular and well-paid 18th century novelist, Anne Radcliffe, 1764 to 1823, specialized in hobgoblin romance. Her fiction held particular appeal for frustrated middle-class women who experience a vicarious vision of excitement when they read about heroines venturing into awe-inspiring landscapes. She was dubbed Mother Radcliffe by Keats because she had such an influence on Romantic poets. The Gothic genre contributed to Coleridge, Christabel, 1816, and Keats' Lovelady Jane Sans Mercy. Mary Shelley blended realist, Gothic, and Romantic elements to produce her masterpiece Frankenstein, in which a number of romantic aspects can be identified. She quotes from Coleridge's romantic poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. In the third chapter, Frankenstein refers to his scientific endeavors being driven by his imagination. The book raises worrying questions about the possibility of regenerating mankind, but at several points, the world of nature provides inspiration and solace. The Byronic hero. Romanticism set a trend for some literary stereotypes Byron's A Child Harold, 1812 to 1818, described the wanderings of a young man disillusioned with his empty way of life. The melancholy, dark, brooding, rebellious Byronic era, a solitary wanderer, seemed to represent a generation, and the image lingered. The figure became a kind of role model for youngsters. Men regarded him as a fool, and women found him enticing. Byron died young in 1824 after contracting a fever. This added to the appeal. Subsequently, a number of complex and intriguing heroes appeared in novels. For example, Heathcliff and Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, and Edward Rochester in Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, both published in 1847. Contraries in Romantic period. Romanticism offered a new way of looking at the world, prioritizing imagination above the reason. There was, however, a tension at times in the writings, as the poets tried to face up to life's seeming contradictions. Blake published Songs of Innocence and of Experience, showing the two contrary states of the human soul, 1794. Here we find two different perspectives on religion in The Lamb and the Tiger. The simple vocabulary and form of the Lamb suggests that God is the beneficent, loving Good Shepherd. In stark contrast, the creature depicted in The Tiger is the powerful blacksmith figure. The speaker is stunned by the exotic, frightening animal, posing the rhetorical question, did he who made the lamb make thee? In The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, 1790 to 1793, Blake asserted, without contraries is no progression. Wordsworth's Chinton Abbey, 1788, juxtaposed moments of celebration and optimism with lamentation and regret. Keats thought in terms of an opposition between the imagination and the intellect in a letter to his brothers in December 1817. He explained what he meant by the term negative capability. That is when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reacting after fact and reason, 22nd December. He suggested that it is impossible for us to find answers to the eternal questions we all have about human existence. Instead, our feelings and imaginations enable us to recognize beauty, and it is beauty that helps us through life's bleak moments. Life involves a delicate balance between times and of pleasure and pain. The individual has to learn to accept both aspects. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That's all you know on earth and all you need to know all on a Grecian urn. This is a nice quote taken from that poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn. It published in 1819. The premature deaths of Byron, Shelley, and Keats contributed to their mystic. As time passed, they attained iconic status, inspiring others to make their voices heard. the Romantic poets continued to exert a powerful influence on popular culture. Generations have been inspired by their promotion of self expression, emotional intensity, personal freedom, and social concern. Then, realism. Realism in romantic. What does realism means? Concern for fact or reality and rejection of the impractical and visual. A doctrine that universal exists outside the mind, specifically the conception that an abstract term names an independent and unitary reality. What is realism in literature? Literary realism is a literary movement that represents reality by portraying mundane, everyday experiences as they are in real life. It depicts familiar people, places, and stories primarily about the middle and lower of middle and lower classes of society. Next one, the concept of nature in romantic period. According to the romantics, the solution was back to nature because nature was seen as pure and a spiritual source of renewal. It was also a way out of the fumes of growing industrial centers for the new industrial bridge. Then, what is the concept of the nature in romantic literature? Romantic poets try to heal the sorrows of human beings by writing their verses about nature. Thus, romantic poets believe that nature is a source of revelation. They use simple language and shape nature as a god. What is the concept of romantic period? The romantic period is a term applied to the literature of approximately the first third of the 19th century. During this time, literature began to move in channels that were not entirely new but were in strong contrast to the standard literary practice of the 18th century. So here I stop here. In the next video, we will continue this unit. Thank you.